The Valorian Empire had conquered 43 star systems in their march across the galaxy. Their method was simple and it worked every time. They would arrive with massive fleets, demand surrender, and crush anyone who dared to resist. When their scouts found Earth, they expected nothing different from this primitive world. Commander Zethric looked at the reports about humans with disgust. These creatures had barely achieved faster than light travel. Their weapons were laughable. Energy guns and simple missiles that would bounce off Valorian shields like rain. The entire human fleet had maybe 300 ships scattered around their one solar system. It would be easy. The Valorian Empire sent 50 warships to handle Earth. It was considered more than enough force for such a weak species. They arrived at the edge of human space and broadcast their message. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. The humans had one day to decide. A single human ship came to meet them. It called itself the UES Defender. The captain was a man named Jack Porter. He asked for a meeting. Zethric allowed it because he wanted to hear these primitives beg for mercy. Jack Porter appeared as a hologram on the Valorian bridge. He was an older man with gray hair and a face that showed no fear. This surprised Zethric. Most species showed terror when they first saw the Valorian fleet. Jack spoke calmly. He said he represented the United Earth Systems. He said they had reviewed the Valorian demands for surrender. His voice was steady and clear. Zethric laughed and told Jack that resistance was pointless. The human military could not stand against even this small Valorian fleet. He said humans should surrender now and they would be allowed to live as subjects of the Empire. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again and his words made even Zethric pause. He said humanity had faced extinction before. They had fought wars that consumed their entire planet. They had built weapons that could destroy their own world. They had looked into the darkness of their own destruction and somehow stepped back. But they learned something important in those terrible times. Zethric asked what they had learned. He was already bored with this speech. Jack said that when humans are pushed to the edge, when their survival is truly threatened, they do not surrender. They fight with everything they have. They fight until nothing is left. Zethric laughed so hard his whole bridge crew heard it. He told Jack that brave words meant nothing. The human fleet had 300 ships. The Valorians had 50 warships here that could turn Earth into ash. Behind them stood the full Valorian Empire with billions of soldiers and tens of thousands of ships. Humans could not win, Jack nodded slowly. He agreed that the Valorians were right about one thing. They were looking at the entire human fleet, all 300 military ships, every warship humanity had built. But then Jack said something that would haunt Zethric for weeks to come. He said that what the Valorians were seeing was not humanity's whole army. It was just everything humans were willing to show them. Before Zethric could respond, Jack saluted. He said the Valorians had 24 hours to leave human space. After that, humans would consider their presence an act of war. Then the hologram vanished. Zethric stared at the empty space. Then he burst out laughing again. His officers joined in nervously. The audacity of these primitives was almost entertaining. Zethric ordered his fleet to hold position. They would wait exactly one day as protocol demanded. Then they would show these humans what real power looked like. The countdown began. But then something strange started happening. Human ships began arriving. Not hundreds, thousands. They came from asteroid fields, from moons, from every hidden corner of the solar system. These were not military vessels. They were civilian ships, mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners. All of them had been armed. Drilling lasers, missile pods welded to hulls, railguns attached to cruise ships. Zethric watched his display screen with growing concern. The human fleet now numbered over 10,000 vessels, and more were still coming. He demanded an analysis from his officers. His tactical officer reported that these were not proper warships. They were civilian vessels with improvised weapons. Their armor was weak. Their weapons were basic. But their numbers were far beyond what Valorian intelligence had predicted. Zethric felt doubt for the first time. He asked where all these ships came from. Valorian scouts had watched this system for months. They had counted the human ships carefully. His officer had no answer. On the UES Defender, Jack Porter stood in the command center watching the display. His second in command was Commander Lisa Grant. She stood beside him looking at the gathering human fleet. Lisa asked if Jack thought the Valorians were impressed yet. Jack smiled, but there was no humor in it. He said not yet, but they would be soon. He ordered all ships to begin their attack preparation. Lisa acknowledged the order. Then Lisa spoke quietly. She said that even with every civilian ship they had armed, humans were still outgunned ship by ship. The Valorian technology was centuries ahead of Earth technology. Jack nodded. He knew this was true. But he said that wars are not won by technology alone. They are won by the side willing to pay the higher price. And humanity had already decided what price they were willing to pay. Lisa said it softly. Everything. Jack repeated the word. Everything. He looked at the display showing the 10,000 human ships. Most of them were piloted by civilians who had volunteered, miners who had never fired a weapon, transport pilots who had spent their lives moving cargo, tourist ship captains who had shown people the beauty of space. All of them had volunteered to fight. All of them knew they would probably die, but they also knew what would happen if they did nothing. The Valorians would enslave Earth. They would take away human freedom. They would turn humanity into just another conquered species in their vast empire. That was not acceptable. That would never be acceptable. The deadline approached. In a few hours, the Valorians would attack, and humanity would show them something the Valorian Empire had never encountered before. A species that could not be conquered because they refused to accept conquest. A species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Jack Porter took a deep breath. He thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about all the families across human space. He thought about the future they were fighting for. Then he gave the order. All ships prepare for battle. The Valorian fleet waited exactly 1 day as their protocol demanded. When the deadline passed, Commander Zethric gave the order to advance. 50 Valorian warships moved forward in perfect formation. Their shields glowed with protective energy. Their weapons charged for the devastating first strike that would break human resistance. What happened next was unlike anything in Valorian military history. The human fleet did not form traditional battle lines. Instead, 10,000 ships scattered in what looked like complete chaos. They broke into hundreds of small groups that spread throughout the entire combat zone, like a swarm of angry insects. Zethric muttered that they were just undisciplined rabble. He ordered his ships to target the largest groups and fire at will. The Valorian warships opened fire with plasma cannons. Devastating beams of energy shot across space. The beams were powerful enough to destroy a standard warship with one shot. They struck dozens of human vessels. Ships exploded as their weak armor failed against Valorian firepower. But for every ship that died, 3 more rushed in closer. The human vessels did not fight like a proper military fleet. They fought like wolves hunting prey. They converged from multiple angles on individual Valorian ships. Mining lasers designed to cut through asteroids burned into Valorian shields. Improvised missiles overwhelmed the Valorian point defense systems through sheer numbers. One group of cargo haulers surrounded a Valorian destroyer. 20 massive ships pressed their hulls against the destroyer's energy shields. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons and missiles. They were not built to handle the physical pressure of 20 huge ships grinding against them. The shields flickered and died. Within seconds, human boarding teams cut through the hull with industrial torches. Zethric demanded a report as alarms sounded across his bridge. His tactical officer reported with shock in his voice that they had lost the Crimson Blade. The humans were using ramming tactics. They were sacrificing their own ships to bring down Valorian vessels. Zethric watched in disbelief as a human passenger liner accelerated directly toward a Valorian cruiser. The cruiser's automated defenses tore the liner apart. The ship broke into pieces and crew died. But the wreckage kept moving forward. The debris cloud slammed into the cruiser's shield generators. The explosion took out the entire port side of the cruiser. Zethric said these tactics were insane. The humans were killing themselves. His tactical officer replied that the humans did not appear to care. On the human command channel, Jack Porter coordinated what looked like chaos, but was actually a carefully planned strategy. He directed different groups to attack specific targets. He ordered some ships to screen Valorian cruisers while others moved in for close attacks. One squadron leader acknowledged his orders. Jack recognized the voice. It was Captain Henry Stone, a freighter pilot who had hauled grain between Earth and Mars for 30 years. Now he commanded armed cargo ships loaded with explosives. Jack opened a private channel. He told Henry that he did not have to do this. Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said of course he had to do this. His grandchildren were on Earth. He would not let these aliens turn his home into a slave world. Jack wished him good hunting. Henry said he would see Jack on the other side. Then his squadron of 12 heavy cargo ships accelerated toward the Valorian flagship. They were packed with every explosive human engineers could manufacture. The Valorian point defenses were formidable. They destroyed 6 ships before they got close, but 6 ships made it through. The explosions were massive. They would have vaporized anything without shields. The Valorian flagship's shields held but barely. They flickered and weakened under the assault. Jack ordered all nearby ships to concentrate fire on the flagship while the shields were down. Hundreds of human vessels opened fire. Most of their weapons were too weak to trouble Valorian armor normally. But focused fire from hundreds of sources was different. Railgun slugs, laser bursts, missiles, and even old chemical rockets hammered the flagship from every direction. The Valorian flagship shuddered under the assault. Zethric gripped his command console as the ship shook. He demanded a damage report. His officer said shields were at 30% and falling. There were hull breaches on multiple decks. Engine efficiency was down. All across the fleet, Valorian ships were reporting similar damage. The humans were not trying to win clean ship battles. They were accepting terrible losses to inflict any damage they could. Zethric stared at the tactical display. He had already lost 6 ships, 6 warships destroyed by converted civilian vessels with improvised weapons. It should have been impossible. It was humiliating. But it was happening. He gave the order to fall back and regroup. The Valorian fleet began withdrawing. Human ships pursued them like wolves chasing wounded prey. The battle had lasted 4 hours. The Valorians had destroyed over 1,000 human vessels, but humanity still had 9,000 ships ready to fight, and more were arriving from deeper in the solar system. Commander Lisa Grant stood beside Jack Porter. They both watched the tactical display in silence. The names of destroyed ships scrolled past. Each one represented crews who had volunteered knowing they would probably die. Lisa said quietly that 1,000 ships meant at least 10,000 people dead. Maybe more. Jack's jaw was tight. He said he knew. Lisa asked if it was worth it. Jack said they had made the Valorians retreat. They had bloodied their nose. They showed the Empire that conquering humanity would not be quick or easy. And they bought time. Time for evacuations. Time to build more weapons. Time for other human colonies to prepare their defenses. Lisa said time bought with lives. Jack replied grimly that lives were the only currency they had right now. In the retreating Valorian fleet, Zethric composed his report to Imperial High Command. His hands trembled as he recorded the message. He reported that humans had refused surrender and engaged the fleet in combat. The initial battle resulted in 6 Imperial warships destroyed and 30 more damaged. Human losses were estimated at 1,000 vessels, but they possessed far greater numbers than intelligence had indicated. He said these humans fought without regard for their own survival. They used ramming tactics, suicide attacks, and overwhelming swarm formations. He was requesting immediate reinforcement. His fleet alone was not enough to subjugate this species. He paused before continuing. The humans had claimed that what the Valorians observed was their entire military fleet. After fighting them, he believed this was a lie. No species could field 10,000 warships without showing evidence during reconnaissance. He believed humans had been preparing for this exact scenario. How many more ships they had was unknown. He recommended extreme caution. Zethric sent the message and collapsed in his command chair. For the first time in his military career, he felt genuine fear. Not fear of death in battle, fear of something worse. Fear that the Valorian Empire had started a war it could not win. The report from Commander Zethric landed on Grand Admiral Korath's desk like a bomb. The leader of the Valorian Imperial fleet read it 3 times because he could not believe what it said. A primitive single-system species had forced an Imperial fleet to retreat. The damage reports were clear. The tactical recordings were clear. The impossible truth was clear. Korath called an emergency meeting of the War Council. Holographic projections of the Empire's top military leaders appeared around the council chamber. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to rage. Admiral Vrek slammed his appendages on the table. He said this was unacceptable. A full subjugation fleet driven back by primitives in cargo ships. Commander Zethric should be stripped of rank for incompetence. Korath replied coldly that the tactical logs did not show incompetence. They showed that the Empire had badly underestimated the humans. Another admiral asked how many ships the humans actually had. Their intelligence was supposed to be thorough. Korath explained that was the problem. Valorian scouts had watched the human system for 4 months. They documented 300 military vessels. Nothing suggested thousands more existed. An admiral asked where the extra ships came from. Korath displayed the combat footage showing the human vessels in detail. He pointed out that they were not military ships. They were civilian vessels converted to warships. Some conversions looked like they were done in days or even hours. Welded armor plates, exposed weapon mounts, crude power systems. The Council watched silently as footage showed a human mining ship cutting through a Valorian destroyer with its drilling laser. The mining ship exploded from return fire, but the damage was already done. The destroyer died. Vrek said quietly that the humans were sacrificing themselves deliberately as a tactic. Korath corrected him. It was not just a tactic. The entire human strategy was based on acceptable losses. They were willing to trade 10 ships for 1 Valorian vessel, 20 ships, 50 ships, whatever it took. And with the number of civilian vessels they could convert, the math favored them. Another admiral spoke up. This changed everything strategically. Standard subjugation required 5-to-1 numerical advantage against an organized military. But if humans could field unlimited numbers through civilian conversion and they accepted catastrophic losses, then even 500 ships might not be enough. Vrek looked shocked. 500 ships for 1 primitive system. That was nearly 1/10 of the entire Valorian military. Korath said flatly that the alternative was accepting defeat. If word spread that the Empire was driven back by primitives, every subject world would start questioning their own subjugation. There could be rebellions on dozens of worlds. The Council fell silent as they understood the implications. Korath continued by displaying more tactical data. Human weapons were primitive but effective at close range. Humans were not trying to match Valorian technology. They were forcing battles where technology mattered less than numbers and willingness to die. It was a deliberate counter to Valorian doctrine. Vrek said they should change doctrine, engage only at long range, use superior firepower to destroy humans before they could close the distance. Korath asked how long that would take. If humans had 10,000 ships now and were building more constantly, the war could last years. The Empire did not have resources to sustain that kind of campaign, while maintaining security across all territories. A younger admiral named Torvin spoke carefully. He suggested negotiation. Humans must realize they could not truly win. The Empire could offer favorable terms. Autonomy within the Empire, protection from other species, trade agreements. Vrek's voice dripped with contempt. Negotiate with primitives who killed Valorian soldiers. That would look like weakness throughout the Empire. Torvin countered by asking if negotiation would be weaker than the current situation. They had already lost 6 ships and suffered their first retreat in decades. The damage to their reputation was done. They could commit massive resources to subjugate one system and risk further losses, or they could negotiate from relative strength and claim they were being generous to a worthy opponent. Korath considered this. The young admiral had a point. The Empire's strength had always come from overwhelming force applied quickly, but humans proved that strategy had limits against opponents willing to pay any price. Korath said he would consider their recommendations. Meanwhile, he authorized mobilization of Conquest Fleet Prime, 300 warships. They would station at the edge of human space but not attack, a show of force while the Empire decided its next move. Vrek asked what would happen if humans attacked them. Korath replied that then they would know if negotiation was possible. Back in the Sol system, humanity worked frantically to prepare for the next assault. Jack Porter had been promoted to admiral and given command of all Earth defense forces. He coordinated operations from a new command station in orbit around Luna. Captain Dan Crawford approached Porter in the command center. Before the war, Dan had commanded a luxury cruise liner. Now he commanded converted civilian vessels. He reported they had finished converting another batch of ships. 2,000 more vessels ready for combat. Most would be destroyed in any serious fight, but they would buy time. Porter studied the display showing the Valorian fleet holding position at the system's edge. 300 ships, 6 times the force they had already fought. He observed that the Valorians were waiting to see what humans would do, trying to decide their next move. Dan asked hopefully if they were considering retreat. Porter said no. They were considering how badly they wanted to make an example of humanity versus how much it would cost. And for the first time, they were realizing some species could not be conquered, not because they could not be beaten, but because the price was too high. Commander Lisa Grant joined them carrying a datapad. Intelligence had intercepted Valorian communications. Humans were causing debates at the highest levels of their government. Some wanted to send everything they had. Others wanted to negotiate. A few were suggesting they should declare the Sol system a quarantine zone and warn other species to stay away from the crazy humans. Porter smiled slightly. He said that was good. Keep them uncertain. Keep them debating. Every day they waited was another day to prepare, build more ships, and evacuate more civilians to outer colonies. Grant asked quietly how long humans could keep this up. Porter replied as long as they had to. That was the advantage the Valorians did not understand. They were fighting because their empire ordered them to. Humans were fighting because they had nowhere else to go. When defending home and family and everything known, you do not worry about how long you can keep fighting. You just keep fighting until you cannot anymore. Dan nodded slowly. He said there was something else. Word had spread to other human colonies. Mars, the Belt Stations, even the new settlements around Alpha Centauri. All were mobilizing, sending every ship they could spare. If Valorians attacked again, they would not just fight Earth. They would fight all of humanity. Porter looked at the display showing the Valorian fleet. 300 ships, the most powerful fleet humanity had ever faced. But surrounding that fleet, hidden among asteroids, concealed behind moons, scattered across billions of kilometers of space, were over 20,000 human vessels now. Military ships, converted civilian ships, ancient mining barges held together with determination and hope. Every single one crewed by humans who decided that whatever came next, they would face it fighting. Porter ordered all ships to maintain defensive positions. Do not engage unless fired upon, but make sure the Valorians could see them. Let them count human numbers. Let them do the math. Let them imagine how many more ships might be hiding deeper in the system. Grant said to make them afraid. Porter corrected her. Make them understand. There was a difference between defeating an enemy and conquering them. The Valorian Empire was about to learn that lesson. The stalemate lasted 3 weeks. The Valorian fleet stayed at the edge of the Sol system. The human fleet maintained defensive positions around Earth and the inner planets. Every day more human ships arrived from outer colonies and hidden construction facilities. Every day the Valorians watched their advantage shrink as human numbers grew. Admiral Porter used the time well. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden facilities worked day and night producing weapons and ammunition. On Earth, massive evacuations moved civilians to underground shelters and off-world colonies. Humanity prepared for the worst while hoping for something better. The something better came in an unexpected form. Commander Grant reported they were receiving a transmission from the Valorian fleet. It was marked as a diplomatic message. Porter exchanged glances with his senior staff. He ordered them to put it through. The holographic display showed a different Valorian than before. This one wore different insignia and carried himself like a politician rather than a soldier. The Valorian introduced himself as Envoy Draxus of the Valorian Imperial Diplomatic Corps. He said he was authorized by Grand Admiral Korath to discuss peaceful resolution to the conflict. Porter kept his face neutral. He said he was listening. Draxus explained that the Empire recognized humans possessed certain qualities that made traditional subjugation impractical. Human willingness to sacrifice, rapid mobilization capabilities, and unconventional tactics had been noted. The Empire was prepared to offer an alternative arrangement. Porter said flatly that the Empire meant they realized conquering humans would cost more than they were worth. Draxus showed something that might have been respect despite his alien features. He said the Empire dealt in practical realities. Yes, they could defeat humanity eventually with sufficient force and time, but the cost in ships and resources, and most importantly, the message it would send to other potential resistors, made such action inadvisable. Porter leaned forward. He asked what they were proposing. Draxus explained protected autonomy. The Sol system would remain independent. Humans would govern themselves. In return, humans agreed not to expand beyond current territory for 50 years. They would permit Empire trade vessels to pass through their space unmolested, and they would not provide material support to any resistance movements in Empire space. Porter asked what would happen if humans refused. Draxus said then the Empire would commit whatever forces necessary to eliminate humanity. Not subjugate, but eliminate. They would make human worlds uninhabitable. The human species would cease to exist. This would be costly, but the Empire could not allow defiance to go unanswered. The bridge fell silent. Captain Dan Crawford spoke first, asking if they would really commit genocide rather than accept they could not win. Draxus corrected him, saying they could win. The question was whether they won through subjugation or extermination. They were offering a third option where humanity survived with dignity and freedom. Porter thought about the 20,000 ships surrounding Earth. He thought about the 1,000,000 volunteers crewing them. He thought about projections his staff had run. In total war against the Valorian Empire, humanity might destroy 10 fleets or 20 or maybe more. But the Empire had resources spanning dozens of systems. Eventually, the math would turn against humans. There was another consideration. The civilians who had already died, the evacuated cities, the children hiding in underground shelters. The cost of victory, if they could even achieve it, would be measured in billions of human lives. Porter said carefully that he needed to consult with Earth's government. This was not a decision he could make alone. Draxus replied that Porter had 48 hours. After that, the military option would be implemented regardless of cost. The hologram vanished. Commander Grant broke the silence, saying the extermination threat was serious. Intelligence confirmed the Valorians had weapons that could sterilize entire planets. Porter said quietly that he knew. Over the next 2 days, debate raged across Earth and throughout human colonies. Some argued for continued resistance. They had bloodied the Empire's nose. They proved humans could fight. Why give up now? Others looked at tactical realities. The Valorian Empire controlled vast territories. They could bring resources humanity could not match. And their threat to simply destroy Earth rather than conquer it had the ring of truth. Porter met with Earth's President Karen Wells in a secure facility deep underground. She asked what Jack thought. The president looked like she had aged 10 years in the 3 weeks since war began. Porter said honestly that he thought humans could hurt the Valorians badly. They could make them pay a price they had never paid before. But he also thought that in the end, the Empire could do what they threatened. They could sterilize Earth and Mars and every human colony, and they would if humans pushed them to it. Wells asked if this meant surrender. Porter said firmly no. They would negotiate from a position of strength. Humans proved they could fight. They proved they could not be easily conquered. Now they used that proof to secure independence, not as subjects, not as defeated people, but as equals who demonstrated they were not worth the cost of conquering. Wells was quiet for a long moment. She asked what would happen in 50 years. Porter smiled grimly. In 50 years, humans would have built more ships and better ships. They would have time to advance technology, expand to more systems beyond current borders, and make themselves even more expensive to attack. The Empire was giving humanity time. They would be fools not to take it. Wells said some would see it as defeat. Porter replied that some saw Pearl Harbor as defeat. Some saw the fall of France as defeat. Humanity had a long history of losing battles and winning wars. This was just another chapter. The president nodded slowly. She told Porter to prepare a response to the envoy. They would accept the terms. When Porter delivered humanity's acceptance to envoy Draxus, the Valorian's expression was unreadable. Draxus said it was a wise decision. The treaty would be formalized and transmitted to Earth's government. The Empire would withdraw fleets from human space within the week. Porter asked about the other species the Empire had conquered. The ones watching to see what happened. Draxus said that was not human concern under treaty terms. Porter said he was making it his concern. The treaty said humans could not support active resistance in Empire territory. But nothing said they could not share technological developments with other species. Nothing said they could not trade with them. And nothing said they could not give them the same advice humans followed. Draxus stared at him. He asked what advice that was. Porter smiled and said that sometimes the best way to be free is to make yourself too expensive to enslave. That numbers can overcome technology, that a species willing to pay any price for freedom is a species that cannot be conquered, only destroyed, and that empires built on fear and subjugation eventually fall. Draxus said Porter risked much with such talk. Porter replied that humanity had already risked everything. That was why Draxus was here offering peace instead of firing on Earth. Because the Empire finally understood what it meant, to face humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The Valorian fleet withdrew 3 days later. Earth celebrated. The outer colonies celebrated. Across human space, people mourned the fallen and celebrated the survivors. But in Admiral Porter's office, there was no celebration, only planning. Commander Grant found him studying star charts weeks after the treaty was signed. She said everyone was at the victory celebration and he should be there. Porter said this was not victory. This was round one. They bought time. Now they had to use it. Grant asked how. Porter finally looked up and Grant saw determination in his eyes. He said the Empire thought 50 years would let humans forget what happened, that humans would settle into comfortable isolation and be content with their corner of space. They did not understand humans at all. He gestured to the charts. In 50 years, humans would not have 20,000 ships. They would have 200,000. And they would not be converted civilian vessels. They would be warships built from the ground up using human tactics, swarm tactics, saturation attacks, overwhelming numbers. Grant asked if he was planning for the next war already. Porter said no. He was planning to make sure there never had to be a next war. The Empire backed down because humans made themselves too expensive to conquer. In 50 years, humans would make themselves too dangerous to attack. And after that, maybe there could be real peace. Not peace of subjugation or fear, but peace that comes when both sides genuinely respect each other's strength. 5 years after the treaty, the Valorian Empire received troubling intelligence reports. Humans had established 3 new colonies beyond their original system. This was technically within their permitted expansion zone, but the colonies were developing far faster than projections indicated. More concerning was that these colonies were producing ships at rates that seemed impossible for human technology level. 10 years after the treaty, human trading vessels began appearing at the edges of Empire space. They followed all laws carefully, carrying only commerce and civilian goods. But everywhere they went, subject species watched with interest. The ships themselves were messages. If humans could stand against the Empire and survive, what did that mean for other species? 15 years after the treaty, reports of unrest reached Valorian High Command. On 3 separate worlds, subject populations were demanding greater autonomy. They were not calling for rebellion yet, but they referenced the human treaty. They asked why they could not have similar arrangements. The Empire, stretched across dozens of systems, found itself negotiating where it once simply dictated terms. Admiral Porter was now elderly, but still served as humanity's senior military advisor. He watched these developments with satisfaction. The strategy he had outlined to Commander Grant was working better than hoped. Grant observed during one of their regular briefings that the Empire was changing, not quickly but noticeably. They were having to consider subjects' concerns in ways they never did before. Porter agreed that fear was a powerful motivator. The Empire was afraid that what happened with humans could happen elsewhere, so they were loosening their grip, making concessions, treating subject species more like partners and less like conquered territories. A younger officer named Commander Jake Harrison asked why they were still building warships at this pace. The treaty held. They were at peace. Why continue mobilization? Porter smiled and asked Harrison how many ships humans had now. Harrison replied approximately 80,000 combat-capable vessels with another 40,000 in various stages of construction. Porter asked how many they had when negotiating the treaty. Harrison said 20,000, but they were mostly converted civilian vessels. The current fleet was purpose-built warships. Porter said exactly, and in 35 more years when the treaty's initial term expired, how many would they have? Harrison considered this. At current production rates, perhaps 300,000. Maybe more if they established additional shipyard facilities. Porter said the Empire knew this. They could count. They could see human expansion. They knew that in 35 years, humanity would not be a difficult target they chose not to conquer. Humans would be a genuine peer power, perhaps even superior in raw numbers. Grant added that this assumed humans maintained current trajectory, and the Empire maintained theirs. but empire growth was constrained by the need to maintain control over existing territories. Human growth was not. Humans were expanding and building and innovating without the overhead of empire. Porter mused that it was elegant, really. The empire gave humans 50 years to stay contained, thinking it would allow them to consolidate and prepare. But instead, those 50 years were transforming the strategic balance. By the time the treaty expired, war with humanity would not be expensive. It would be potentially fatal for the empire itself. 25 years after the treaty, everything changed. A new species called the Krill swarm emerged from unexplored space. They were aggressive and expansionist with no interest in diplomacy. They attacked both Valorian and independent systems without distinction. The Valorian Empire, focused on internal stability and still wary of humanity, found itself fighting on multiple fronts. The Krill were different from any enemy the Valorians had faced. They used overwhelming numbers and swarming tactics. They appeared willing to accept catastrophic casualties to achieve objectives. The tactics were familiar to anyone who had studied the human-Valorian conflict. Grand Admiral Korath still led the Empire's military despite his age. He recognized the irony immediately. The Empire now faced an enemy that fought like humans had, but without any restraint or willingness to negotiate. Korath sent a brief message to Admiral Porter requesting military consultation. He said their fleets were being overwhelmed by an enemy using tactics similar to those humans employed. Any advice would be valued and compensated. Porter called an emergency meeting of Earth Security Council. President Marcus Chen said the empire that threatened to exterminate humans was asking for military advice. Grant pointed out that the Krill were a threat to everyone. If the empire fell, the Krill would turn toward human space next. Humans were natural targets after they consolidated empire territory. Commander Harrison said they should help, but what should they ask in return? Porter had been thinking about this question for 2 decades. He said simply everything. The negotiation took 3 weeks. When it concluded, humanity had secured what would have been unthinkable 25 years earlier: full independence beyond the original treaty terms, mutual defense pact, technology sharing agreements, most significantly a seat on the Galactic Council, the Empire's governing body for interspecies relations. In return, humanity committed its growing fleet to defend Empire space against the Krill incursion. The first battle of the Krill frontier became legendary. 150,000 human ships supported by 70,000 Valorian vessels faced a Krill swarm of nearly 500,000 vessels. The battle lasted 4 days and resulted in catastrophic losses on all sides. But humanity won. The tactics that forced the Valorian Empire to negotiate now saved it. Human commanders understood swarm warfare intuitively. They knew how to counter it, and how to break massive enemy formations into smaller groups that could be defeated. They taught these tactics to Valorian officers who had spent careers fighting different kinds of enemies. Admiral Grant commanded the joint fleet from the flagship UES Determination. Beside her on a split screen was Valorian Fleet Commander Torvin. He was the same young admiral who had suggested negotiation with humanity decades earlier. Torvin observed that humanity fought well. Grant replied that humans had good teachers. The Valorians showed humans what they were capable of when they had no choice but to fight. Humans were just returning the favor. After the battle, as both fleets regrouped and tended wounded, something remarkable occurred. Valorian and human crew members met aboard joint medical stations. They shared stories. They mourned their dead together. They recognized in each other the common experience of soldiers who survived hell. 5 years later, the Krill War ended with negotiated peace. The Krill, having encountered 2 species willing to match their willingness to sustain casualties, agreed to territorial boundaries and limited trade. They never became friendly, but they stopped being an existential threat. On the 50th anniversary of the original Human-Valorian Treaty, a celebration was held on a neutral station at the border of human and Valorian space. Admiral Porter, now ancient and confined to a wheelchair, attended along with Grand Admiral Korath, similarly aged and weathered by decades of war and peace. Korath said quietly that Porter had known. When negotiating the first treaty, Porter knew how this would develop. Porter smiled and said he hoped but did not know. But he understood something about humans that the Empire had not encountered before. Humans were at their best when against the wall, when they had something to lose. The Empire gave humans 50 years to prepare for the possibility of fighting again. Instead, humans spent that time building something that made fighting unnecessary. Korath said Porter built a fleet that could destroy the Empire. Porter corrected him gently. Humans built a fleet that meant destroying humanity would destroy the Empire too. That was different. Mutual survival instead of mutual destruction. Once the Valorians had to respect human strength, it became possible to work together. The Krill War just accelerated what would have happened eventually anyway. Korath was quiet for a moment. He said his predecessor, who ordered the first attack on humanity, died years ago. But before he died, he said that encountering humanity was the best and worst thing that ever happened to the Empire. Porter asked best and worst. Korath explained worst because it shattered Valorian assumptions about how power worked in the galaxy. Their entire military doctrine had to be reconsidered. Their approach to subject species had to change. They became weaker by their own standards. Porter asked about the best. Korath gestured to the celebration around them. Humans and Valorians as former enemies and current allies. He said it taught the Empire that there were different kinds of strength, that there were species worth knowing as equals rather than subjects, that the galaxy was larger and more complex than their Empire ever imagined. They were stronger now than before, just not in the ways they expected. Porter watched a young human officer laughing with a Valorian counterpart. Both were too young to remember the war that nearly destroyed both species. He said the Empire panicked when they realized human 300 ships were not the whole army. They could not imagine what else humans might be hiding, but the truth was human ships were never the whole army. Real strength was never the vessels. It was the people willing to crew them, the civilians willing to become soldiers.